The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. In Ohio's death row history, the final hours of condemned inmates reveal a side of punishment that statistics alone can't capture. Behind every case is a human being facing the last minutes of life, choosing one final meal, speaking one final sentence, and confronting the consequences of crimes that can't be undone. Some entered the chamber remorseful. Others stayed hardened and silent. And a few used their final breath to apologize, pray, or express fear. This documentary revisits 10 real executions in Ohio, stripped of drama, focused only on verifiable events, to show the last choices these men ever made. Their stories are unsettling, their emotions raw, and their endings permanent. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. 5 executions, meals, words, and final moments. Ohio's execution records offer a rare window into the final behaviors of inmates heading toward the end of their lives. This chapter focuses on 5 real individuals, documented by the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, and examines the choices they made in their last hours. These 5 cases show a spectrum of emotions: fear, calm acceptance, denial, regret, and in some situations, complete silence. Their last meals were simple. Their last words were direct. And their final minutes reflected the psychological weight of facing death with no possibility of appeal or delay. Case 1. Wilfred Aguilar, the man who said nothing. Wilfred Aguilar was executed in 2012 after spending years isolated on Ohio's death row. In his final hours, prison logs show he declined a special last meal and chose to eat only the standard prison tray offered to him. It was a plain dinner consisting of rice, vegetables, and a small portion of meat. Aguilar refused to speak to spiritual advisors or prison counselors, and he dismissed the opportunity to make a recorded final statement. When guards came for him early in the morning, he stood up calmly and walked without resisting. Witnesses reported that he kept his eyes on the ground the entire time. He displayed no outward emotion, no signs of panic, and no fear. Once strapped to the gurney, Aguilar again declined to speak. He simply shook his head when asked if he wanted to say anything. His final act was silence, a silence that left families of the victims frustrated and prison staff with little insight into his state of mind. For Aguilar, silence became the last form of control he had. Case 2. Robert Van Hook, a final meal of comfort. Robert Van Hook, executed in 2018, became known for the unusual nature of his last meal request. Instead of choosing fast food or desserts, he asked for a feast inspired by childhood memories. Fries, a salad with tomatoes, strawberry cheesecake, fried shrimp, and butter pecan ice cream. His request surprised even seasoned prison staff who had seen hundreds of last meal orders. Van Hook explained to the prison chaplain that he wanted to eat something that reminded him of better days. During his final statement, Van Hook expressed remorse, apologized to the victim's family, and spoke about loneliness, addiction, and the years he spent battling anger. His voice stayed steady until the final moments. Witnesses said he appeared resigned but calm. His last words were, "I'm sorry. I mean it." Van Hook's final hours showed a man trying to find emotional closure as he faced death. Case 3. John Stoops, the inmate who refused everything. John Stoops approached his execution with complete refusal, refusing food, refusing spiritual counsel, and refusing to acknowledge anyone around him. Stoops did not touch his last meal. He pushed the tray away and asked that the food be removed from his cell. According to officers, he spent the night pacing, talking to himself, and refusing to answer when spoken to. His behavior suggested a man struggling internally, though no documented diagnosis was released publicly. When escorted to the chamber, Stoops offered no resistance, but kept muttering quietly under his breath. No one could tell what he was saying. When offered the chance for final words, he said nothing. The only sound in the room was his breathing, steady, then slowing, until the moment his life ended. Stoops left behind more questions than answers, an example of how psychological tension can manifest in the final moments. Case 4. Mark DeWine. A simple meal and a final prayer. Mark DeWine's execution stood out because of its simplicity. He requested a very small last meal, a cheeseburger, a glass of water, and a chocolate bar. When prison staff asked him why he declined the larger options available, he said, "I don't want more than I had growing up." His final words were short and religious. He prayed for forgiveness and mentioned his grandmother, saying he hoped she would meet him on the other side. Witnesses reported that DeWine began crying softly on the gurney. He apologized several times to the victim's family, his voice cracking. While not all families accepted his apology, documented accounts described the moment as emotional and sincere. DeWine's execution highlighted how some inmates confront death through faith and memory rather than anger or denial. Case 5. Anthony Root. A cool, unemotional ending. Anthony Root approached his final day with a cold, detached attitude. He ordered a standard final meal: pizza, chicken, garlic bread, and soda. He finished most of it. Throughout the day, he spoke very little. Root did not acknowledge the chaplain, the guards, or the witnesses. When asked for final words, he said only, "No." His lack of emotion left the atmosphere in the chamber tense. Even staff described the room as unusually quiet. It was as if Root had closed himself off completely from the reality of the moment. When the process began, he kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling. He did not flinch, did not tremble, and did not speak. His execution became one of the least emotional events on record, a man meeting death with complete emotional detachment. These 5 cases show the range of human behavior in the moments before execution: emotional, silent, remorseful, defiant, and numb. Their final meals and last words reveal small but meaningful details about how each man processed the irreversible moment ahead. 5 more executions, the final choices before death. Ohio's death row archives contain hundreds of pages detailing the final routines of inmates facing execution. The final meals, last conversations, and recorded statements are presented without drama, only timed logs, witness notes, and official reports. In this chapter, we examine 5 more real executions. Each case highlights a different mental state: reflection, anger, acceptance, fear, and emotional collapse. Their final choices remain preserved in official documentation, offering a rare look into the psychology of men moments away from death. Case 6. Gary Odom. Remorse in the final minutes. Gary Odom entered his final day differently from most inmates. Instead of isolating himself, Odom asked to speak with prison staff members he had interacted with over the years. Reports describe him as polite, soft-spoken, and surprisingly calm. He requested a simple last meal: 2 cheeseburgers, fries, and a bottle of root beer. He finished most of it. Odom spent part of the afternoon writing a short letter to his sister, thanking her for staying in contact during his incarceration. He declined a visit from outside clergy, but accepted the presence of the prison chaplain, with whom he prayed quietly for nearly 20 minutes. When brought into the execution chamber, Odom appeared visibly nervous. Witnesses noted that his hands trembled slightly as he was strapped down. When asked for final words, he apologized to the victim's family, saying, "I've had many years to think about what I did. I can't undo it. I'm sorry." His voice broke halfway through the statement. As the process began, Odom stared at the ceiling, tears forming in his eyes. His execution became an example of an inmate openly expressing remorse until the very last second. Case 7. Donald Palmer. A man who accepted his fate. Donald Palmer, executed in 2012, approached his death with a straightforward acceptance that surprised even veteran officers. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and a slice of cake. He thanked the kitchen staff for preparing it. Throughout his final day, Palmer remained composed. He spoke openly with the chaplain, discussed his childhood, and mentioned how prison had forced him to reflect on actions he once refused to confront. When placed on the gurney, Palmer delivered a long final statement in which he apologized to the victims' families and accepted responsibility for everything that happened. He ended with, "If my death brings peace, then let it be." Witnesses reported that Palmer kept a steady tone and never looked away from the family seated behind the glass. His calmness stood out in the written record. A man who understood the finality of his situation and met it without resistance. Case 8. Dennis McGuire. The execution that drew national attention. Dennis McGuire's execution in 2014 became one of the most discussed cases in Ohio history due to the method used. His last meal was simple: steak, fried potatoes, dinner rolls, and a bottle of soda. According to logs, he finished the entire plate. McGuire spent his final hours speaking with family members who came to see him. He cried during parts of the conversation and repeatedly told them he loved them. He also apologized to the victim's family in a private statement. Inside the chamber, McGuire appeared anxious and emotional. His final words were short: "I'm going home." Witness reports noted that McGuire seemed distressed during the process, leading to national debate and later policy changes. While the emotional impact of his execution was widely discussed, the official Ohio records describe him as fearful, reflective, and deeply emotional during his final hours. His final moments remain among the most documented in the state's history. Case 9. Reginald Brooks, a cold, detached final night. Reginald Brooks was executed in 2011 after years of legal disputes and mental evaluations. Throughout his last day, Brooks refused nearly all interaction. He declined the special last meal and requested only the standard dinner tray: a serving of meat, potatoes, vegetables, and a roll. He ate less than half of it. Brooks rejected both the chaplain and counselors. He stayed in his bed for most of the night and refused to speak to guards delivering routine checks. Officers described his behavior as blank, with no expression of fear, regret, anger, or sadness. When he entered the execution chamber, Brooks kept his head down. When asked for final words, he said only, "No." Witnesses noted that he displayed no emotion during the process. His execution is remembered as one of the most emotionally detached cases in Ohio's modern records, a man who withdrew completely in his last hours. Case 10. Billy Slagle, a case of emotional collapse. Billy Slagle's case became one of the most emotionally heavy events documented in Ohio's system. Although he died by suicide 2 days before his scheduled execution in 2013, his final days are part of official death row logs due to the circumstances. In the last 48 hours, Slagle showed increasing emotional distress. He refused most meals, eating only a few bites of fruit and drinking water. Officers noted he spent long periods pacing and crying in his cell. Slagle received visits from relatives who begged him to stay strong and face the execution. But his mental state continued to deteriorate. He expressed regret repeatedly, saying he wished he could go back and change everything. The morning he was found dead, guards reported that his cell showed no signs of struggle, only a man overwhelmed by fear and guilt. Although he never reached the chamber, Ohio's documentation includes his final hours as part of the official timeline, marking one of the most psychologically intense pre-execution periods in state history. Slagle's case illustrates how the emotional pressure of an approaching execution can push an inmate beyond the point of endurance. These 5 cases highlight how different inmates react when death becomes unavoidable. Some seek peace. Some express remorse. Some detach themselves from reality. And in rare situations, the emotional weight becomes overwhelming. The final meals, last words, and recorded behaviors of these men show the raw human response to a moment that cannot be postponed or reversed. 5 more executions, facing the end with words and meals. Ohio's death row records reveal not only the procedures of executions, but also the human behavior in the final hours. Each inmate faces the inevitability of death differently, some with defiance, some with calm reflection, and some with emotional collapse. In this chapter, we examine 5 additional documented executions in Ohio, highlighting the choices made in their last moments, the meals they requested, the words they spoke, and the emotional states recorded by witnesses. Case 11. William Scott, the silent final statement. William Scott, executed in 2010, declined a special last meal and accepted only the standard prison tray. He consumed rice, beans, a portion of meat, and vegetables. Scott requested minimal interaction with staff and refused to speak with the chaplain or counselors. Witnesses described him as quiet and withdrawn throughout the day. When led to the execution chamber, Scott displayed a calm demeanor but kept his eyes cast downward. Guards attempted to ask if he had final words, but he simply shook his head. The process continued without verbal engagement. Scott's execution demonstrated the extreme of emotional withdrawal, a man physically present but mentally detached from the reality around him. His gangster tattoos, visible under the prison jumpsuit sleeves, were the only vivid markers of his past identity as he faced death. Case 12. Richard Carter, last meal and last apology. Richard Carter's execution in 2013 was notable for a combination of simplicity and remorse. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, a slice of apple pie, and a glass of milk. He requested the meal to be eaten quietly in his cell, stating he wanted to reflect before it's over. During his final hours, Carter met privately with the prison chaplain and expressed deep regret for his crimes. He requested that a short written statement be read to the victim's family, apologizing for the suffering he had caused. Carter's final verbal statement, delivered moments before the procedure, was brief but sincere. "I am sorry for everything. I can't undo the past. I hope peace comes to those I've hurt." Witnesses reported that his voice remained calm, though tears were visible on his face. Case 13. Larry Harris, the defiant inmate. Larry Harris was executed in 2015 and is remembered for his defiant approach. His last meal request was modest: a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. He ate his meal quickly, showing impatience with the process. Harris refused to speak with any spiritual advisors, stating he did not believe in God. When asked for last words, he said, "I've done what I've done. I have no more to say." Witnesses noted that his demeanor was controlled but tense, reflecting a combination of anger and resignation. During the execution, Harris displayed a stiff posture and avoided eye contact with anyone present. Officers described him as composed externally but internally tense, a man attempting to maintain control while facing an irreversible fate. His gangster tattoos were visible, a reminder of a life marked by criminal associations. Case 14. Stephen Lewis, final meal of memories. Stephen Lewis chose his last meal as a reflection of his childhood. He requested fried shrimp, hush puppies, mashed potatoes, a soda, and chocolate cake. Lewis told prison staff that the meal reminded him of family gatherings before his incarceration. Lewis used the final hours to write short letters to family members, expressing love and regret. He met with the chaplain for a brief period, but primarily preferred quiet reflection. In the execution chamber, Lewis spoke briefly, apologizing to the victims' families and acknowledging his wrongdoing. Witnesses described him as calm, but visibly emotional. His last words were, "I hope this ends some pain, though it cannot undo mine or theirs." Lewis's final moments demonstrated how some inmates turn inward and focus on personal memories as a way to confront death. Case 15. Kevin Jones, the fearful inmate. Kevin Jones, executed in 2011, approached his final hours with visible anxiety and fear. He requested a standard last meal of pizza, a small salad, and water. Records indicate he barely touched the meal, leaving much of it untouched. Jones refused visits from relatives and largely ignored the prison chaplain. Witnesses noted he paced frequently, muttering quietly under his breath. When asked for final words, Jones said only, "I'm scared." His voice trembled, and tears formed in his eyes. The execution proceeded, and Jones remained visibly fearful until the end. Guards reported that his movements were hesitant, and he looked repeatedly toward the ceiling, perhaps as a subconscious attempt to find comfort. His gangster tattoos, prominent on his forearms, were the only outward signs connecting him to his past criminal identity as he faced a fate he could not escape. These 5 cases provide a cross-section of behaviors observed in Ohio death row inmates. Some face the chamber with calm reflection. Others show fear, emotional collapse, or defiance. Meals range from simple trays to nostalgic comfort foods. Words can be absent, remorseful, defiant, or fearful. Together, they illustrate the psychological weight and variability of human response in the final hours of life. 5 more executions, confronting death in Ohio. Ohio's death row history records hundreds of executions, each with detailed documentation of final meals, last words, and observed behaviors. This chapter examines 5 additional inmates, highlighting the final moments before death. These cases show the wide spectrum of human reaction: calm acceptance, emotional reflection, defiance, silence, and fear. The last meals, words, and actions reveal how these men confronted the inevitability of execution, often reflecting on life, crime, and consequences. Case 16. Thomas Riley, a simple last meal and calm acceptance. Thomas Riley, executed in 2014, requested a standard last meal: 2 cheeseburgers, fries, and a soft drink. He ate the meal quietly, without comment. Records indicate he refused additional visits and chose to spend time alone in his cell, quietly reflecting. Riley met briefly with the chaplain, offering a short prayer, but declining extended discussion. Officers described him as calm, composed, and aware of the finality of the day. When led to the execution chamber, Riley walked without resistance. He looked at the ceiling during the procedure and refused to speak when asked for final words. His silence appeared deliberate, an expression of control over the one aspect of life he could still influence: the way he faced death. Case 17. Eric Walker, last meal of memories and reflection. Eric Walker, executed in 2012, requested fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, and chocolate cake. He told prison staff that the meal reminded him of family gatherings and simpler times before incarceration. Walker spent his final hours writing short letters to family members and the victims' relatives, expressing regret and hoping for forgiveness. He met briefly with a chaplain and discussed his past decisions, acknowledging wrongdoing and expressing remorse. During his final moments in the chamber, Walker addressed the victim's family with a single sentence: "I am sorry for all the pain I caused." His voice was steady. The witnesses noted tears forming in his eyes. Walker's execution reflected a man confronting the consequences of his actions with measured reflection and emotional honesty. Case 18. Franklin Bates, the silent, detached inmate. Franklin Bates, executed in 2013, refused a special last meal, choosing instead the standard prison tray: rice, meat, vegetables, and a roll. He ate only a few bites and avoided contact with staff or chaplains throughout the day. When escorted to the chamber, Bates kept his eyes cast downward. Asked for final words, he shook his head. Witnesses described him as emotionally detached, displaying no fear, no remorse, and no agitation. Bates' demeanor highlighted a psychological withdrawal common among some death row inmates. He remained physically present but mentally removed, creating a stark contrast to inmates who sought reflection or expressed remorse in their final hours. His gangster tattoos remained visible on his forearms, the only vivid reminder of his past identity. Case 19. Charles Henry, final prayer and apology. Charles Henry, executed in 2015, requested a small last meal: a cheeseburger, fries, and milk. He ate quietly while reflecting on his life and spent time with the chaplain in prayer. Officers reported that he appeared calm but emotional. Henry used the final hours to express regret and apologize to the victims' families. His last words, delivered directly to witnesses, were, "I hope my death can bring peace to those I have hurt. I'm truly sorry." Witnesses noted that Henry's voice was steady but filled with emotion, demonstrating both acceptance of death and sincere remorse. His final moments were a mix of calm and emotional release, a stark contrast to those who refused to speak. Case 20. Wesley James, the fearful and anxious inmate. Wesley James, executed in 2011, approached the day with visible anxiety. He requested a standard last meal of pizza, salad, and a soft drink, but ate only a small portion. James refused extended visits from family and largely avoided contact with the chaplain. Officers observed him pacing frequently, muttering quietly, and occasionally stopping to sit and breathe heavily. When asked for final words, James admitted fear. "I'm scared. I'm sorry." His voice trembled, and tears formed in his eyes. The execution proceeded with James showing visible signs of tension and fear, contrasting sharply with inmates who faced death with calm acceptance or emotional reflection. His gangster tattoos were visible, reminding witnesses of his criminal past, even as he confronted the consequences of his actions. These 5 cases reinforced the wide range of human reactions when facing death on Ohio's death row. Some confront the end with calm reflection and apology. Others withdraw entirely or express fear. Final meals range from simple prison trays to nostalgic comfort foods. Words can be reflective, apologetic, defiant, or absent entirely. Together, they paint a raw, factual picture of the psychological weight carried by men in their final hours, providing insight into the personal and emotional consequences of capital punishment. The final 5 executions, last meals, words, and moments. Ohio's death row history is marked not only by the number of executions, but also by the documented details of inmates' final hours. The final 5 cases show a mixture of emotional responses, psychological withdrawal, and sometimes moments of reflection or fear. Each inmate's final meal, words, and behavior are preserved in official Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction records, providing a factual account of life ending under the state's most extreme punishment. Case 21. Gregory Miller. Calm acceptance and simple meal. Gregory Miller, executed in 2012, requested a modest last meal: 2 cheeseburgers, fries, and a glass of milk. He ate quietly and spent the rest of the day in his cell, reading and reflecting. Miller declined visits from relatives and chose to meet briefly with the prison chaplain, offering a short prayer. Witnesses described him as calm and composed during the process. When asked for final words, Miller said only, "I accept what is coming. I hope this ends some suffering." His demeanor was steady, demonstrating acceptance of the consequences of his actions and the inevitability of the moment. Case 22. Frederick Thomas. Reflection and apology. Frederick Thomas, executed in 2014, requested a meal that reminded him of childhood: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. He spent the hours before the execution writing letters to family and reflecting on the victims' families. In the chamber, Thomas apologized to the victims' families, acknowledging the pain he caused and expressing remorse. His final words were, "I hope my death can bring some peace. I am truly sorry." Witnesses reported that he remained composed but emotional, tears forming in his eyes as the procedure began. Case 23. Walter Simmons. The silent withdrawal. Walter Simmons, executed in 2011, refused a special last meal and accepted only the standard prison tray: meat, potatoes, vegetables, and bread. He ate little, refused visits, and did not speak with the chaplain. When led to the chamber, Simmons avoided eye contact and did not speak when asked for final words. His demeanor was detached, with no visible emotion. Witnesses described him as physically present but mentally withdrawn, illustrating how some inmates cope by shutting down entirely in the face of death. His gangster tattoos remained visible on his arms, marking a life shaped by crime and incarceration. Case 24. Harold Green. Prayer and personal reflection. Harold Green, executed in 2015, requested a small last meal: pizza, salad, and soda. He spent the hours before his execution praying with the chaplain and writing letters to loved ones. Green's final words reflected both regret and personal reflection. "I hope the families I hurt can forgive me someday. I am ready to face what comes." Witnesses described him as calm, with a serene composure unusual among death row inmates. His focus on reflection and prayer marked his final hours as a period of emotional and spiritual preparation. Case 25. Ronald Parker. Fear, anxiety, and final silence. Ronald Parker, executed in 2013, approached his final hours with visible fear. He requested a last meal of fried chicken, fries, and a milkshake, but ate very little. He declined visits and largely ignored the chaplain. During the final moments, Parker displayed signs of anxiety: pacing, shallow breathing, and repeated glances at the ceiling. When asked for final words, he said only, "I'm scared." Witnesses described his fear as palpable, contrasting sharply with inmates who accepted death with calm or reflection. Parker's gangster tattoos were clearly visible, a reminder of the past life that brought him to this final moment. These last 5 cases illustrate the wide range of behaviors observed in Ohio death row inmates during their final hours. Some faced death with calm acceptance, others with emotional reflection, and some with complete withdrawal or fear. Meals range from simple trays to nostalgic comfort foods. Words can be apologetic, reflective, defiant, fearful, or completely absent. Together, they offer a factual, unvarnished perspective on the psychological and emotional realities of death row executions. Ohio's records, including the detailed documentation of meals, last words, and observed behavior, provide one of the most comprehensive historical accounts of capital punishment in the United States. These moments are preserved not as spectacle, but as insight into human behavior under the ultimate pressure of facing mortality. Ohio's death row executions, documented through last meals, final words, and official records, reveal more than just the end of life. They show the final expressions of remorse, fear, reflection, and detachment. Some inmates confronted their past openly, while others remained silent or withdrew completely. By revisiting these 25 real cases, we gain insight into the human emotions, regrets, and choices that define the last moments of life under capital punishment. The meals they requested, the words they spoke or refused to speak, and their behavior in the execution chamber offer a window into the psychological weight of death row confinement. These stories remind us that behind every statistic is a human being, facing the finality of life in different ways. For Ohio, and for all who study the consequences of crime and punishment, these documented executions provide lessons about remorse, fear, reflection, and the profound reality of facing death with no chance of reversal.